Welcome to Returning to Soul, a podcast for lawyers and other high achievers seeking deeper meaning, purpose, and fulfillment in their work and lives. My name is Jessie Brown. I practiced law for 15 years before becoming a career alignment coach and purpose guide for lawyers and other high achievers. I also work as a meditation teacher, breathwork facilitator, sound healer, and forest bathing guide. And I facilitate nature-based retreats in Arizona. In this podcast, we explore what it means to return to our soul, to discover and live our true purpose. My guest today is Courtney Schulnick, a former litigator of 20 years, turned mindfulness educator and corporate wellness consultant. Today, we're exploring how mindfulness can support us in aligning our career with our true self. Courtney, I'd love to hear about your journey from working as a lawyer to becoming a mindfulness educator and corporate wellness consultant.
Hi, Jessie, and so great to be together with you and to get an opportunity to talk about mindfulness. So I can begin just in terms of alignment. Right off the bat, I felt very out of alignment. I went to law school not because I necessarily felt that it was aligned with what I wanted and what I was looking to achieve ultimately, but through not knowing, through taking some time off in between college and law school, I took 3 years off, and not liking being in that messiness, not being on a track of knowing that if you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to get this, that, and the other. So I think it was the feeling, partly, of wanting to be on some type of track, having some type of structure. But what was also coming through in a really powerful way was the shoulding on myself. I had certain interests that I think I would have felt more aligned pursuing those interests as a profession, but there were parts of me that felt like that's not good enough. Or I should go to law school because it's prestigious and I'll make lots of money and it looks good and I'll challenge myself. So there were definitely certain aspects of law school that aligned with what I wanted, but right from the gate, I think I was out of alignment in choosing to go to law school. So I went to law school, and after law school, I got a clerkship, which felt more in alignment with what some of my interests were. I really loved family law in law school, and I loved children. So it kind of checked some of the boxes. But after a clerkship in family court, I realized it was a little too emotional for me, and I didn't have the skills that I have now. I didn't have them as a newer attorney. So I found that wasn't feeling so aligned with what I wanted as a legal professional. But then that sort of, I guess I would call it a pattern of not knowing, not being very uncomfortable in the not knowing, the uncertainty and the messiness of not having a plan. I just sort of jumped at the next job I could get. And that happened to be a position as an associate attorney at a plaintiff's medical malpractice firm. If you know anything about me, I have an older brother who I'm very close with, who is a doctor. And I think he disowned me. I think he disowned me for for that first year in practice. He said, "You're suing my people and me." But I really didn't I felt like I was a little behind the eight ball, because here I was so in it with the clerkship. I wasn't really searching for a job. I was so laser focused on the work I was doing at the time that I didn't really feel like I had the bandwidth to be exploring what's next. So anyhow, I jumped at the first opportunity that I got. Did not really resonate with my values, and I pushed through because I thought that, okay, I'm newer at this. The more and more I do it, the more comfortable I'll get. But all the cues I was getting was telling me otherwise. I then did find a position working as a defense litigator. It was at a large firm. When I was working in the med mal firm doing plaintiffs work, it was a smaller firm outside the city. But then I after about a year, I switched to the other side, and I was handling defense, premises liability, and product liability cases at a larger firm. It was in Philadelphia, where I happened to be living, and it checked a lot of the boxes in terms of what I was looking for. So it did feel more in alignment with what I wanted, and I noticed I felt more comfortable in the physical environment. But I still noticed that pushing, even a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years into practicing as a defense litigator, it still didn't feel totally aligned with what I wanted. And I didn't allow myself to really listen to what was coming up for me, or to open to what was revealing itself. I kept on boxing myself up as this is what I committed to, and I should be able to do it. And again, if I keep on pushing, I'm going to get used to the nature of litigation. So I stayed in it. I did very well from on the surface. I think I very much came through as a high performing attorney, but beneath the surface, there were a lot of questions and uncertainty and discomfort. So what sort of compounded the discomfort and stress and overload was I got married. We started a family. I had a son, and then I had another son, and life got really, really full in good ways. I was handling interesting cases. I had a beautiful family, but the pace of life and the demands of my work, not to mention the demands of being a mom and a wife, it didn't give me the space to slow down, to step out of autopilot, and to really assess what was coming up for me. And what was there was, I don't want to say I was unhappy, because again, I was very grateful for a job that offered me for fulfillment in terms of like challenging me intellectually, and I had so many wonderful things happening in my personal life, but there was a big piece that didn't feel aligned. And so each day it just felt like I had to push through. And I realized that I had been suppressing some of my own feelings. I had, just to sort of step back a bit, in the midst of our first child and our second child, I had some fertility issues. And again, I just kept suppressing what was coming up for me, because I wanted to do a great job at the work that I was doing as a litigator. And eventually it all caught up with me. And that was the moment when, or I should say the moment, there was a moment in my life where I realized this isn't the way I want to continue living. That I want to feel more joy. I want to feel more connected to my work. I want to feel more connected to me. And I think that in turn, by feeling truer to who I am, I think that really ripples out. And it felt like it was missing from the whole picture. So at the suggestion of a therapist who I had been working together with for years to figure out, like, what's missing here? Like, why am I feeling so much tension? Why does this feel so much effort? And anxiousness, the stress, it just felt like it was growing and growing and growing, which made sense in some ways because the more seasoned you become as an attorney, the bigger, the higher stake cases you're going to handle, and your responsibilities grow. I was doing more marketing for the firm, but something felt very something felt misaligned. And so she suggested that the therapist who I was meeting with suggested that I look into the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. She didn't tell me a whole lot, but she told me enough that it sparked some curiosity in me. And she said, it's about deepening your present moment awareness. You can gain greater clarity and better manage stress and anxiety. So I enrolled in the MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Program, which is an 8-week program that meets once a week for 2.5 hours each week for 8 consecutive weeks. And then towards the end, usually between weeks 5 and 6 or 6 and 7, there's a full day retreat. And about 3 weeks into the program, I noticed that I was getting clearer. I was getting clearer in what it was that I wanted. And I wasn't sort of turning my back to what was showing up. I was getting more intimate with it and actually getting curious, like, what's this? Why am I feeling this way? And I started to notice how I was relating to the parts of my work that prior to that really made me feel more anxious or overwhelmed. I really got to understand how I was perceiving parts of my life, and in many ways creating more suffering and more stress. And so it wasn't my intention when I took the MBSR, it wasn't my intention to leave the practice of law. It was to actually find more alignment, to find more fulfillment, to find more joy and comfort and presence in my life, in my career. And the program gave me that. It helped me to really understand my mind and how rigid we can be with ourselves by the things we tell ourselves, how judgmental we can be about ourselves as lawyers, as moms, as human beings. And with that awareness, I was able to loosen the reins a little bit. And that was really the greatest gift, because that gave me the space to really assess what was present and what it was that I wanted. So I didn't take the program to leave. In fact, I completed the program and I stayed in the game, so to speak, for another decade. And I think I did some of my finest work in the following 10 years as a litigator, because I learned tools that helped me to calm myself, which, as you know, as attorneys, especially in litigation, our nervous systems can be in overdrive. And it just really helped me to recognize that there were actually pieces in the work that I was doing as a litigator that were aligned with what my values were. I just wasn't able to see them prior to that. I was so checked out in certain ways and so overwhelmed that I couldn't get to like a baseline to even take in the full picture. So it was really a gift in that it taught me ways to connect more fully with myself, to actually recognize the pieces of my work and of my life that were aligned with what I wanted. But through regular practice, through staying curious about what was coming up and being less judgmental, I organically came closer to what ultimately fulfilled me. So it was a process of sort of being so rigid and feeling like I should do this to a point where the calling to like reassess what was here was so loud that it brought me to mindfulness, and mindfulness in turn allowed me to really appreciate certain parts of my life and my career that otherwise I wasn't able to appreciate.
Wow. Well, thank you, Courtney. That's an amazing story. And I just know that so many listeners will resonate with so much of what you shared. I mean, my own experience, I really resonate, but also when you were starting out in your career, this discomfort with uncertainty and the unknown is so familiar. And I can remember similarly, you shared there were some other potential career paths that you had considered and then chose law. I was in an MFA program in creative nonfiction writing. I really wanted to write or be like a English professor. I was an English
Yeah.
major I loved, but it was the uncertainty of that career that I couldn't really handle at that time, and law was a very clear path.
That's
Yeah.
we have, I know, just offline from our conversations, we have a lot in common. And
Yes.
yeah, I contemplated becoming a school teacher.
Hmm.
I had, in the time I had off, I had substitute taught at a local school, but I was a photo minor, and I thought I've always been into art, and I thought I would become the next Annie Leibovitz, and I worked for a photographer shooting Bloomingdale's. I was shooting shoes, and the from the financial end, there was a lot of uncertainty. It wasn't the most secure position. So all these uncertainties, to your point, yeah, there was a lot of comfort on some level, just knowing, okay, I'm going to go to law school and I'm going to put in the time and I'll get a good job. And but I sort of put on the back burner all these other pieces that we really need to include in the equation, or we're going to end up feeling out of alignment.
Absolutely. And, you know, I'm curious, your decision to do the MBSR program when you were working as a litigator, you had your family, and 2 hours or 2.5 hours a week plus the retreat. For some lawyers, that can seem like, wow, that's a big commitment. But I personally know when you can set aside that kind of time, you can get the results you got, which is so much clarity, whether it's clarity about going a different direction in your career or just learning the tools and the nervous system regulation techniques and everything you talked about to help you really thrive as a lawyer. So
Yeah.
I'm curious for you, what was it like to carve out that space and really invest in yourself in that way?
That's a great question, because I will admit, you take a stress reduction program with the hope that you're going to make your life less stressful. And from a time perspective, I had children who were young
Mhm.
ages. I was working full time as a litigator. So the thought of taking away another 2.5 hours each week, not to mention home practice. There's 30 minutes of home practice, 30 to 45 minutes of home practice on a daily basis. And yeah, and as you said, a full day retreat. It seemed really overwhelming.
Mm.
But what I found is that carving out that time to take better care of myself wasn't something that was selfish. It wasn't something that was only for me. I found that it made me a better wife, a better mom, a better attorney, because the tools and the skills that I learned, it allowed me to show up more fully for
Mhm.
all the parts of my life. Whereas before, when I was at home with my kids, even though I could be watching a movie with them, or I could be at my son's baseball game, I was physically with them, but I was checked out in my mind because
Mhm.
my mind was caught up on my cases or trial coming up, or maybe I was rehashing something from earlier in the week and I wasn't truly present for them. And then when I was at the office, I was feeling guilty about not really being
Mhm.
present with them. And so I started to notice this sort of pendulum like flow. I wouldn't even call it a flow. It wasn't like a flow in a good way, but just this rigidness with my attention and my whole being. So it really allowed me to show up more fully for the people
Mm-hmm.
in my life and for the moments of my life. So it at first it seemed a bit daunting, but the more and more I tasted the fruits of the practice and I saw the ways in which it was benefiting me, not only in how I was feeling physically, emotionally, and mentally, but I saw how much more it allowed me to really bring into my personal life, my professional life, and in turn take away from
Mm.
both sectors. Yeah.
I love that. And, it reminds me of something I actually read on LinkedIn this morning. Somebody was talking about the compulsion to constantly be busy and, always on and doing the one thing and then the next thing. And that's so common as lawyers and especially as working parents. We go from work and then our kids and back to work, and
Yeah.
it can really be like that. And I was thinking that what if the most productive thing we can actually do is what you did? Is some type of practice, whether it's daily meditation, walks in nature, yoga, whatever it is for somebody. It doesn't, journaling, meeting with a therapist or coach. There's so many ways to invest in ourselves. But what if that investment in ourselves is actually the most productive or the highest use of our time, because it does impact how we show up in everything, in our work, in our family lives, in our friendships. Like
Yeah.
it's this positive impact in everything.
Yeah.
But we don't often get that message in the mainstream culture.
I was just talking about that with someone. We're so conditioned to keep pushing and to do
Yeah.
more and more. But something that I could never really understand that my teacher, Elise Moss, who's the associate director at the Center for Mindfulness at Jefferson, she would say to practice more the art of non doing. And I was thinking, what? Non
Yeah.
doing? I don't know what that is
Yeah.
because when I'm physically not doing something, the mind is just going. And so I didn't understand that. And to
Mhm.
me, as an attorney who had to capture every moment of my time in terms of billing my time spent on files, it seemed like when I'm not doing, that's time wasted. That's
Mhm.
time that I'm not being productive. And it really goes against the grain for, I think, what so many attorneys and others who work in high performing professions where we're expected to be on. But I say there really is so much value in turning that on button off
Mhm.
and disconnecting, because that is how we recharge ourselves. That
Mhm.
it sounds counterintuitive, but by giving ourselves space to rest, that is what allows us to recharge, so that when we go back to the work that we do, or being parents, or even just our daily routines, that we can act and do from this more nourished space, but also our creativity, our ability to connect with ourselves. There's so much that we can learn and grow from when we give ourselves the permission to step out of this constant doing and to just be, or to practice,
Mm.
as my teacher says, the art of non doing.
I love that. And I want to explore something you just said about how this allows us to connect more deeply with ourselves. And a lot of the, lawyers I work with as a coach, they know that there's something not working for them in their career, but they don't know what it is. And they're dissatisfied or unfulfilled, like something's off, and they don't really know what they do want. And they struggle to carve out the space and time to really connect with themselves on that deep level.
Yeah.
Those who are able to carve out that space and time really do make progress much
Yeah.
faster usually. But what I'm curious about is how mindfulness can help lawyers who are feeling that way begin to cultivate that relationship with themselves, to get that insight into what's really driving me in my career choices. What is it that I truly want? What's out of alignment here?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it starts with noticing how we sort of box ourselves up. Again, getting back to the judgmental piece, like what we think is the right thing to
Mm,
do, versus if we even look outside of that framework, it's wrong. What we think is good or bad. and getting curious about that until we're able to turn towards that. We can't really understand our relationship to what comes up for ourselves. And I think, again, just given how demanding our roles are as attorneys, how fast-paced the environment or the nature of law can be, that we need to be able to slow down and give ourselves that space to explore what's here. I also I had something it's escaping me at the time, but at the moment, but in terms of getting okay, now it's coming back to me. So I had to take a moment in terms of like I didn't so I eventually this wasn't the intention, but my intention when I took the MBSR was to find ways to cope, to find ways to feel better in my life, in my work, in my personal life. And through meditation practice, through starting to understand my mind, to see some of the ways I was perceiving the stressors, I started to notice how often I got in my own way. And that clear seeing allowed me to let go of what wasn't serving me. By letting go of what wasn't serving me, I I naturally just got closer and closer to the pieces that really nourished, allowed me to feel more nourished. So it's kind of like what's coming to mind is an onion, but like peeling away the layers of an onion and getting closer to the center of, I don't know why an onion came up, but anyhow, those layers that the more and more you can let go, let be, you just get clear in what it is that you want, what really is most meaningful to you. I don't think we can see that or even connect. That's not seeing, it's actually feeling. I until we're willing to get our hands dirty, so to speak, because a lot of times we turn away from maybe what's scary or uncertain. And if we can just dip our toe in the water and explore what's coming up, we start to see this maybe doesn't serve me, let that go. And so it's through courage, like taking the courage to turn towards what maybe we turn away from, and self-inquiry, really getting intimate with ourselves and listening, like feeling, listening. I think it's pretty commonplace, at least in litigation, because a lot you're dealing with emotionally charged issues and you're expected to be strong and tough, and so often we're encouraged to, I don't want to, or maybe we're discouraged from showing that we're unsure or we're nervous or we're not feeling sure of ourselves. And so these practices, mindfulness, the formal practice of mindfulness, helps us to be more patient, to be more compassionate towards ourselves, to allow what's here, when so often we're kind of just numbing out. And so it was through connecting more with the feeling tone and knowing it's okay if it's different than what I thought I should be or what I should do, that it changes your relationship, I think, with some of the labeling or the compartmentalizing that you have, and and you actually become okay with the messiness. Yeah, I say, like, I'm such a black or white person, and in everything I like things to be neat, but like the messiness is sometimes where the greatest healing and learning and growth can take place. So you can surprise yourself with the practice, and I think that you really do open yourself up to more possibilities. But I will say it takes a certain level of courage to sort of move into a place where maybe for a long time you weren't willing to explore.
That is exactly spot on. It's so good. And, I'm reminded of, I had a session with a lawyer yesterday, a coaching session, and there was something coming up for her emotionally, that some fear, and just asking her, if she wanted to turn toward it and explore it. And at first she said, I'm scared. Like there's a part of me that doesn't want to look at that and go
Yeah.
there. And she even I do internal family systems, so it's a guided sort of almost like a visualization. And she saw that this fearful part, it was as though it was in the back of a cave, is what she saw in her mind's eye, and it didn't want to come forward. And we just were patient and compassionate and curious, and it's always up to the client to lead. So she said, actually, I do want to try to get to know this fear and get
Hmm.
curious about it. So she accessed her own courage during the session. I never push anyone because you have to wait for people to be ready, but she did access her own inner courage. And as she got to know that fearful part, in her mind's eye, she was holding its hand, and it came out of the cave at one point and really showed her what was going on, and where this stuff came from, and it was quite healing for her. So everything you're saying about the courage to look at those difficult emotions, or even what's going on with our thoughts, it does take courage. And I do think when we're curious about it, it's just that compassionate curiosity, like turning within.
Yeah.
IFS, the creator of IFS, Dick Schwartz, he just calls it a U-turn. Like we just do a U-turn.
Yeah.
So that's
It's
everything. Yeah.
the image of hand holding, like, can we
Mm,
be our own good friend?
yes.
And it's not that lawyers aren't nice people. We're very nice people, but I think when it comes to, well, some people, some lawyers, no, but when it comes to ourselves, we are so hard on ourselves and we're so critical. So when we can, like, hold our own hand, when we can befriend what's here, be our good friend to ourselves, it really does. I think there's the misconception that we're going to become soft or a pushover in the practice of law, but it makes us stronger. It makes us more resilient, and it helps us to embrace who we are, what it is we deserve. But it takes support of skilled practitioners like yourself and myself to guide people, to support them along the way, because it can be scary, but
Hmm.
little by little, just exploring with a light touch of mindfulness and curiosity and gentleness
Hmm.
over time can really lead to profound insight.
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. And I just wanted to reflect back something you said a few minutes ago about, as a litigator and probably other types of law practice, I mostly practice litigation as well, but there's this idea that we need to be tough. I remember a partner I worked for, her nickname was the Bulldog, and that was like a name of honor, the Bulldog.
Mine
And
was the pit bull in the
the
courtroom,
pit
which I think
bull.
is hysterical. Yeah.
There
Yeah.
you go. So, and I know I consistently received feedback throughout my law career that I needed to be more aggressive in my legal writing. It's not really my nature
Yeah.
to be that way. So, there is sometimes as a lawyer a need to develop these strong, defenses, essentially, these kind of ways of being in the practice
Yeah.
that can disconnect us from our true nature. If we're
Yeah.
just operating from those parts, for so long that we kind of lose that connection with who am I really? What is it that I actually want? What is my inner guidance telling me? So
Yeah.
it seems like, go ahead, you go ahead.
I really, this resonates with me. I really grappled with sort of playing the role.
Mm,
I had one experience that really stands out so vividly for me. Was I was in Philadelphia. There's small claims court, and then there's the sort of mid-level arbitration hearing that's up to a certain amount, and then there's
mhm,
the major jury trial. I had an arbitration hearing where there were multiple defendants in the case. I was representing one of the property owners, and then there were 3 or 4 other defense counsel and a plaintiff's attorney. And one of the attorneys on the case, we happened to live in the same neighborhood. She was a mom attorney who had a son, one of my son's ages, and we were in the waiting room to get called. In Philadelphia, you're in the general waiting room, and then they assign you a conference room where you then go and argue your case. And we talked about our children at karate and the school system and this one, that. We had a wonderful conversation. Like, I think we even talked about going out for coffee later. And when we got into that room, it's like a switch went off. And she threw my client under the she like pivoted. Like, it was so night and day. And I couldn't, I was, I mean, still I was a zealous advocate for my client, but sort of my values and the way I carried myself. And I could write a really strong, convincing brief, but I was pretty consistent throughout, and I could never quite wrap my head around how some attorneys were night and day different. And again, I know that you had to be the most zealous advocate for your client, but there was like a personality, like in terms of certain traits, that was it was almost like an acting type role. And so I couldn't really get comfortable with that. But what I did do after I took the mindfulness course was I started to see the pieces that I could play up more, that I could lean into more. And they sort of balanced out the pieces that I couldn't wrap my head around. So what you're sharing really resonates with me, because it was just kind of like a disconnect from who I felt I was and who I felt I had to be when I entered that room. Almost like role playing in a sense.
Yes, absolutely. And there may be lawyers where there probably are that role is aligned with who they are, their nature and if it's ethical and done, in compassion and whatever,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
maybe it is really aligned. But I know I talk to lawyers who tell me they don't feel they can be their authentic self at work, that they
Yeah.
feel that they need to conform or shapeshift in some way or hide aspects of who they are.
Yeah.
And I've read research showing that just causes so much stress in the body when we
Yeah.
have to live like that. It's really stressful, and practicing law is already fairly high stress.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you could share with our listeners who are feeling that way, that sort of disconnect from their true self, how mindfulness can help them reconnect with their true self and even their inner guidance to discover, what might be misaligned in their career.
I think it's really through, again, this compassion piece, through allowing and not feeling like you have to conform, but sort of, it's this acceptance piece, that the more you can accept these parts of yourself, rather than beating yourself up for, like, looking at it as if it takes away from your capacity to be a stellar attorney, that it makes you more unique. And like, one of the pieces about myself, again, I had the ability to be the pit bull in the courtroom. I could be tough when I was cross-examining. I had that capacity, but I also had a great deal of compassion for what my clients were going through, and to know that this could be a really scary process. And so to lean into that caring role, that there's different ways of looking at what it is you do, what your role is, and the more and more you can get clarity around who you are, what your values are, you just organically, it weaves its way into what it is you're doing. And when it's not, when maybe you're not in the right
Hmm.
position, maybe you're working in an area of the law, or the culture at the firm where you're at isn't allowing space for
Hmm.
your true self to show up, then I think the writing's on the wall. Then you
Hmm.
know that you have to pivot. But we have to have this inner awareness. We have to
Hmm.
be able to identify how often we get in our own way. And when we
Hmm.
can see that, and be less judgmental, like let our true selves come through, it doesn't have to feel like our every moment. We don't have to feel so uptight. We don't have to question ourselves. We shine. We our innate, I'm going to say beauty. I'm not talking
Hmm.
about like,
Yeah.
how's our makeup or our hair, but or what are we wearing, but our innate wholeness and completeness comes through. But
Hmm.
if we're not able to see clearly, we can't connect with that.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think it begins with connecting with ourselves, and then again, if the position you're in, if the environment you're working in isn't accepting of you for who you are, then yeah, then maybe that's the indication that a move is
Hmm.
good.
Yes, I agree. And something else I noticed is when we started this conversation, you mentioned this feeling of like pushing yourself a lot earlier in your career. And I felt that way as well when I was practicing law. There was, for me, I would say for me, it was the entire time, all 15 years, always,
Yeah,
almost always.
yeah,
Very occasionally, I didn't feel if I really enjoyed connecting with clients in like meetings, if like a
yeah,
one-on-one meeting, helping them navigate a challenge,
yeah,
but that was not, that was a very small percentage of my practice. So
yeah.
I had felt I had to push myself a lot. And even being aware, I think mindfulness can help you be aware of when do I feel like I need to push myself to do my work, and when am I naturally motivated to do my work? When am I maybe in a flow state in my work and feeling energized by my work? It's or versus being drained by my work. So those types of inner experiences as they relate to our work, I think can give us a lot of insight into what our aligned path might look like.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I agree. I totally agree with that. And mine was sort of like, it wasn't the 20 years I was in it, it wasn't like a linear type where I got better and better. It was, I was in the thick of it, and it was a lot of pushing. And then through the program, the mindfulness program, I found like less efforting, less pushing, more kind of just letting be, and then to the point where when my work as a mindfulness teacher grew, and post pandemic, when trials started to ramp up again, then it felt like a lot of pushing again. So it was
Mm,
sort of like ebbs and flows, or like a roller coaster ride. And so just getting back to what you're saying. It's about being honest with yourself,
mhm,
and noticing how you're feeling, and not just grinding out because you think
mhm,
it's what you should do. There came a time when, again, I felt like I was pushing, 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 and trying to
mm,
make it all work, that I had to really get honest with myself. And so it just, it comes back to, I'm going to say, the awareness again. But
mhm,
if we're just on autopilot, and we're just grinding out and pushing, pushing, and not giving ourselves time to check in, to see what's here, then it could be 20, 30, 40 years, and
mhm.
we're so exhausted that we reach burnout. But it doesn't have to get to that point. We can check in, and we can notice if the
Mm.
pushing is the way we want to continue on, or is there some shift that's needed to have more alignment, to
Mm.
feel like there's less efforting.
Yes, I love that. And I actually think this awareness piece that you're talking about is so crucial. It's so important. And What just came to mind was one of my favorite books by this woman, Bronnie Ware. It's fairly well known. She wrote a book called I think it's the Top Five Regrets of the Dying, and she worked as a hospice aide with people at the end of life. And the top two regrets they come to mind a lot for me. So the first one is, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life others expected of me. And the second most common regret at the end of life is, I wished I hadn't worked so hard.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I
these
hear
come up
that.
a lot. And I
Yeah,
think what you just said about you could go 10, 20, 30, 40 years and not really have that awareness. And you could even reach the end of your life and experience these regrets. But cultivating that awareness is actually, I think, the first step in avoiding those regrets.
yeah, I would have to agree with you. And my next life, I want to come back as you. I, I am so in awe of all the books that you. I feel like every conversation you just got done this book and that book, and that's so wonderful. So, in terms of awareness, I'm noticing jealous. I'm feeling jealous for all the books that you have under your belt. But yeah, I think it's easy to just sort of get caught in the speed of life. And to your point, I think to feel regret is one of the most challenging emotions that can come up for us. But to be able to live your life in a way, and again, there's certain demands in our lives that only allow us so much flexibility. But in order to at least try to create more alignment, we have to we have to be willing to notice what's here in this moment.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. So, as we close, Courtney, I'm curious if you could leave our listeners with a small practice if they're curious about mindfulness and how to start incorporating this into their life, how to gain more of this awareness that we're talking about. What's something they could do?
Yeah, so I think a really wonderful place to begin, especially for attorneys
Hmm.
who spend so much time in the head
Hmm.
space, strategizing and coming up with solutions to really complicated, challenging issues for our clients. We are so heady, so to
Hmm.
speak, which serves us in terms of strategy, but we're disconnected from our bodies.
Hmm.
So, a really wonderful place to begin is with the body.
Hmm.
The body is always in the here and now, whereas the mind can take us on a time travel where we're so caught up in a trial that's supposed to come, that's going to be later in the month, or we're worrying about deadlines, or rehashing something we feel like we could have done better. And we can really spin out when
Hmm.
we're so in our minds. So, just to come into the body, to feel the body making contact with the seat of the chair,
Hmm.
to feel the support of the ground beneath, and to notice if there's any holding. As you mentioned earlier, our nervous systems can be in overdrive from the stressful nature of our work, and there's can be a lot of holding. So maybe inviting our bodies, our muscles to soften, and just resting attention. Doesn't have to be for 5, even 4, 3 minutes, but just taking moments throughout your day to feel the body breathing, to feel the support that's here for you. Sometimes just resting attention on that can calm our nervous systems. And when we're feeling calmer in the body, we can in turn think more clearly,
Hmm.
and we can continue doing the high level work that is demanded of us in the profession of law.
Yes, I love that. And I will just add, increasing that body awareness can also help us tap into our inner wisdom, which often shows up in the body if perhaps our job, our particular role, our particular job, or the entire career is out of alignment with who we are.
Yes.
So I know some of my clients, and myself included, have experienced some health issues as practicing lawyers. And so there really is a common habit of disconnecting from the body, sort of ignoring the needs of the body, pushing through. I know lawyers, skip meals or have to go to the bathroom, but I'll wait, just pushing
Yeah.
through. So
Yeah.
yeah, for me as well, probably 5 years ago when I began working with my first coach, I had meditated for quite a while, but on and off, not consistently since law school. But I was very disconnected from my body. And my first coach would ask me, where do you feel that in your body or what's coming up in your body? Is something now I ask my clients. And I remember just being like, what are you talking about? And I have clients who tell me that nothing. They say nothing. I can't. But over time, exactly what you're talking about, just paying attention to how does it feel where our body makes contact with the surface beneath us, our feet on the floor, our belly and chest rising and falling as we breathe, these little
Yeah.
tiny things can really help us reconnect with our body and
Yeah.
really calm the nervous system.
And just to piggyback off what you said, that the body is the greatest
Mm.
wisdom, and we get cues. We get cues from the body. I know you've spoken a lot in the past about some health issues that came up for you when you were working as a litigator and not really slowing down to pay
Hmm.
attention to what was coming up. But we get subtle cues. But
Hmm.
if we're not able to bring awareness to the body, before we know it, a small cue can escalate into something more significant. So when we listen to the wisdom of the body, we can take better care of ourselves. And as you're sharing, I work with a lot of attorneys who, when they finally rest attention on the breath, they're like, that's what it feels like to take a relaxing sigh, or oh, I release so much with that exhalation. So it is, as long as we're living, as long as we're alive, we can always connect with the body, with the breath, and it can be an incredible tool in
Mm.
helping us to connect more fully with ourselves, with our bodies, and with the present moment.
I agree. I'll just wanted to share, I'll end with this. I have been experimenting with Qigong. This is new for me, but
Yeah,
I
love it.
love it. It's
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
And this teacher I found, he'll say, that we put our hands on the body at the end of the practice, and he's like thanking all the internal organs and thank you to my intestines and to my lungs and to my heart. But
Yeah.
it's been so amazing because we don't pay attention to our internal organs very often.
We don't until something's wrong, until we
Yes.
have a problem. And
Yes.
how wonderful it can be to connect with a sense of
Hmm.
gratitude for all the things that are working. We tend to look at what's not working for us,
Hmm.
whether it's our jobs or the people in our lives or the parts of our body. But with awareness, we can be more grateful for all that is right with us. And
Mm.
so I think that's a great place to kind of close out, because I think that attorneys in particular are so often looking at what they're not doing good enough, what's wrong with
Yeah.
them, how they can be better. But there's so much in this moment, there's so much that is right, and there's so much that you can lean into, like to really take in the goodness. And when you can begin to foster greater self-care, we feel better, and then in turn we can link up with more and more of that goodness, of that compassion and well-being.
Beautiful. So, Courtney, where can listeners find out more about you and your work?
Like you, I'm very active on LinkedIn, and you can visit me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I am posting resources, newsletters, different offerings that are coming up each week or each month. So I welcome you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I also have a website. It's Courtney Schulnick Mindfulness. And you can visit my website to learn more about my journey, to receive free resources like guided audio meditations, videos, and then you can also email me if you like at Courtney Schulnick Mindfulness at gmail.com.
Thank you, Courtney. Well, we'll share those resources in the show notes. And this has been such a wonderful conversation. So I
Likewise.
appreciate you being here. And for all our listeners, thank you for spending this time with us. This is Returning to Soul. And I'm so glad you're here. Until next time, be well.